There are men in this world who have been forged in fire, and when the moment comes, you know them not by what they say, but by what they do without hesitation. A lobby full of witnesses, 6 armed men, 1 woman with nowhere to run, and a stranger with a cup of coffee and absolutely nothing to prove. What happened next lasted less than 90 seconds, but it changed 3 lives forever. If you love stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one's going to stay with you. The Grand Meridian Hotel sat at the edge of downtown Chicago like a monument to money. 42 floors of glass and marble, doormen in pressed coats, valets who never made eye contact unless tipped first. The kind of place where $100 got you a glass of wine and a smile, and nothing else came cheap. Ethan Brooks didn't belong there. He knew it the moment he walked through the revolving door. The slight hesitation in the concierge's posture. The almost imperceptible scan that hotel staff do when they're trying to decide whether someone's a guest or a problem. He wasn't either. He was just a man picking up an envelope from a contractor who'd rented a suite on the 14th floor, a home renovation bid for the kitchen he'd been promising his son for 2 years. He was wearing dark jeans, a gray Henley, and a pair of work boots that had seen better days. He carried a paper coffee cup from the diner across the street because he hadn't eaten lunch and the diner's coffee was the closest thing he'd had to a hot meal since breakfast. He was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of running on whatever's left after everything else gets used up. Ethan had been out of the Navy for 4 years. He didn't talk about what he'd done in it. His neighbors assumed he'd been a cook or a mechanic. His son's teachers thought he worked in logistics. His landlord thought he was some kind of government contractor. None of them were exactly wrong. None of them were close. He crossed the lobby toward the elevator bank, coffee in one hand, his phone in the other, half reading a text from his son's after-school program about pickup times. He almost didn't notice. Almost. It was the positioning that caught him first. Not what was happening, but where everyone was standing. 4 years out of the field, and his brain still did it automatically, the way a carpenter's eye finds the uneven line in a wall without being told to look. 3 men near the main entrance, spread too wide for a casual conversation. 2 more flanking the concierge desk, not speaking to the concierge, and 1, the one who mattered, standing close to a woman near the far end of the lobby, between her and every exit. The woman was in her early 30s, tall, composed, wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, dark hair pulled back. She was holding a phone at her side like she'd been told not to use it. Her face was doing the thing faces do when a person is trying very hard not to show fear. The jaw just slightly too set, the eyes just slightly too still. She wasn't a victim yet. But the clock was running. Ethan stopped walking. He didn't stare. He didn't change his posture. He took a slow sip of his coffee and let his eyes move the way he'd been trained to move them. Lazy on the surface, working underneath. 6 men total. No visible weapons, but the man closest to the woman had his right hand inside his jacket, and the fabric was pulling wrong. The 2 near the concierge desk were positioned to prevent anyone from reaching the front entrance. The 3 by the main door weren't talking to each other, which meant they were listening for something, probably a signal. This wasn't random. This was staged. Someone had mapped this lobby. The concierge, a young man, maybe 25, was on the phone behind his desk, but he wasn't talking. He was frozen. The call had probably been made for him. There were 11 other people in the lobby, a couple near the elevator with luggage, a businessman reading something on his tablet, 2 women at the lounge bar on the left side, a bellhop pretending to sort mail near the staircase. None of them had clocked what was happening yet. The man near the woman leaned in and said something quietly. She turned her head away from him, her chin going up, a reflex, not courage, just the body's instinct to create distance when a threat gets too close. He reached for her arm. Ethan set his coffee down on the edge of a decorative table and started walking. Not fast, not slow, the same pace he'd been walking when he crossed the lobby. He pulled out his phone again and kept his eyes on it, like a man navigating toward the elevator while answering a text. Just a guy in old boots, moving through a nice hotel, not paying attention to anything. He was 8 feet away when the man's hand closed around the woman's wrist. "Let go," she said. Quiet, controlled, but the word had steel in it. "You're going to come with us, Ms. Carter," the man said. "That's all this needs to be." Ethan covered the last 8 feet in less than 2 seconds. He didn't announce himself. He didn't say "excuse me" or "hey" or any of the things people say when they want to signal what they're about to do. He simply moved, his left hand finding the man's wrist, the one holding the woman, and twisting in a direction wrists don't go, while his right forearm came across the man's throat with enough force to walk him backward 2 steps before he could process what was happening. The man hit the marble column behind him and made a sound like a punctured tire. The woman, Ms. Carter, stumbled back, yanking her wrist free. She looked at Ethan with an expression he couldn't read and didn't have time to. The 2 men at the concierge desk were already moving. Ethan didn't wait for them. He stepped forward, used the column and the first man's stumbling body as cover for a half-second, and closed the distance on the second man before he could get his hand out of his jacket. One hard strike to the solar plexus, one elbow to the side of the head as he folded. The man went down sideways and stayed there. The third man got his weapon out, a compact semi-automatic, held in the way people hold weapons when they've been trained somewhere cheap and fast. He raised it in the lobby's direction, generally trying to cover too much space with one gun. That was the problem with lobby operations. The geometry worked against you if you didn't control it from the start. Ethan wasn't in the position he'd been in when the man started raising the gun. He'd moved left, into the man's peripheral blind spot, and the gun had to track to find him. Too slow, too mechanical, and by the time the barrel had corrected, Ethan's hand was over it. Barrel pointed at the floor, his other hand at the man's collar, and then the man was down, and the gun was in Ethan's hand, and he was ejecting the magazine in one practiced motion and dropping both pieces in separate directions on the marble floor. The whole thing had taken maybe 30 seconds. The 3 men near the main entrance made a decision. They made it together. A quick look between them, some unspoken calculation, and then they were moving toward the door instead of across the lobby. Ethan watched them go. He let them go. There were 11 civilians in this room, and he was one man without backup, and a pursuit through a hotel entrance onto a downtown Chicago sidewalk was how people who weren't involved got hurt. He stood still for a moment and breathed. The lobby had gone completely silent. The couple near the elevator, the businessman with his tablet, the 2 women at the bar, the bellhop. All of them had flattened against whatever surface was closest, and they were all staring at him. Ethan looked down at his hands. The muscle memory always faded faster now. 4 years ago, the hands would have stayed completely steady for another 20 minutes. Now there was a slight tremor in his right thumb. Not fear. Something else. The body remembering and forgetting at the same time. He turned to the woman. "Are you hurt?" She was looking at him with an expression that had moved past shock into something more focused. Her eyes moved across him the same way his had moved across the lobby 5 minutes ago. Cataloging, assessing. He noticed that about her. She wasn't standing there waiting to be told it was over. She was already figuring out what had just happened and why. "No," she said. Her voice was steady. "Are you?" That surprised him. Most people in her position didn't ask that. "No," he said. She looked at his hands, then at the men on the floor, then back at him. "You knew what you were doing." It wasn't a question. "I saw someone who needed help," he said. "That's not what I said." He picked up the coffee cup he'd set on the decorative table. Somehow, it hadn't tipped. He was faintly annoyed with himself for noticing that. "Security's coming," he said. "And police, probably. They'll need to talk to you more than me. They'll need to talk to both of us. I really can't stay." He said it genuinely, not rudely. He actually couldn't. He needed to pick up his son in 40 minutes from a program across the city, and the contractor's envelope was still up on the 14th floor, and none of what had just happened was something he wanted to explain to a room full of uniforms who would keep him there for 2 hours asking questions whose answers would require a different kind of conversation than he was prepared to have. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're leaving." "I'm leaving." "You just—" She stopped herself. She wasn't the kind of person who finished that sentence out loud. He could tell. "At least tell me your name." He looked at her for a moment. She was standing straight now, both feet even, arms loose at her sides. The posture of someone who'd already started rebuilding her composure from whatever had cracked. The fear that had been in her jaw and her eyes was still there underneath, but she was stacking things back on top of it piece by piece. He respected that. He almost didn't answer. Old habits. "Ethan," he said. He walked toward the elevator. "Ethan," she said behind him. He didn't stop. "I will find out who you are." Press the call button. The doors opened immediately, the way elevator doors do in expensive hotels that have too many of them. He stepped in. She was still looking at him when the doors closed. He rode up to 14, collected the envelope from a contractor named Greg, who talked for 6 minutes too long about load-bearing walls, rode back down to the lobby, and walked out through a side entrance that brought him onto a side street instead of the main entrance where 2 police cruisers were now parked. He didn't run. He walked to his car, a 7-year-old Chevy Tahoe with a dent in the rear bumper and a child's soccer cleat on the back seat floor, and he sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. His right thumb had stopped trembling. He thought about the way the 3 men had walked out the main entrance instead of engaging. They'd made a calculated retreat, which meant they weren't opportunists. Opportunists didn't make calculations under pressure. They just ran. These men had protocols. They'd pulled back because the operation had failed, not because they were scared. There was a difference. He thought about what the man had said. "You're going to come with us, Ms. Carter." That's all this needs to be. That phrasing, that's all this needs to be. That was the language of a man delivering a prepared line. Someone had scripted that. Someone had planned the approach, the positioning, the timing. Someone had known when Ms. Carter would be in that lobby and how long she'd be standing near that column before going to her car or her meeting or wherever she was going. That was a lot of work for a kidnapping that went sideways in 30 seconds. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Then he put the car in gear and drove across the city to pick up his son. Marcus Brooks was 9 years old and had opinions about everything. He had opinions about the best way to tie shoelaces and the worst flavors of sports drinks, and which of his teachers was the most unfair and why. He had his mother's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looked almost amber in afternoon light, and his father's tendency to go completely quiet when something was bothering him, which was a trait Ethan wished his son hadn't inherited. "You're late," Marcus said, climbing into the back seat. 4 minutes. "That's late. I got held up." Marcus looked at him in the rearview mirror with the deliberate, searching look of a 9-year-old who has learned that "got held up" can mean many different things depending on the way it's said. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, bud. I'm fine." Another long look in the mirror. Then Marcus seemed to make the same decision Ethan often made. File it, move on, deal with it later if it comes up again. "Can we have tacos?" "We have food at home." "We have stuff at home. That's not the same as food." Ethan almost smiled. He didn't quite get there. "Sure, tacos." Marcus pumped his fist and looked out the window at the passing city, and Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel and the afternoon light cutting long and orange across the windshield, and tried not to think about the man who had said Ms. Carter like he'd been rehearsing it. He almost managed it. That night, after tacos and homework and Marcus's lengthy negotiation about how late was too late to stay up on a Tuesday, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the contractor's envelope open and the renovation numbers laid out in front of him. They were worse than he'd hoped, a little better than he'd feared. He could make it work, maybe. If the next 6 months went smoothly. He looked at his hands, the right thumb, perfectly still now. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 3 years. Not peaceful quiet, just the absence of a specific sound that used to be there. Claire had laughed at the television. He still noticed every night that the television was just noise now. He folded the contractor's estimate and put it back in the envelope. On his phone, 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. No messages. He set the phone face down on the table and went to bed at 10:15 because Marcus had school at 7:30 and Ethan's alarm was set for 5:45 and there was absolutely no reason to sit in the kitchen alone thinking about a woman he'd never see again and a lobby he'd already walked out of. He lay in the dark for 40 minutes before he fell asleep. The phone on the nightstand had 4 missed calls by then. The fifth missed call came at 6:14 in the morning, 12 minutes before Ethan's alarm was set to go off. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, lying on his back in the gray pre-dawn light, listening to the distant sound of a garbage truck working its way down the street. His body had stopped requiring 8 hours somewhere around his second deployment, and it had never really recovered the habit. 4 hours, maybe 5 on a good night, and then the brain just switched on, whether he wanted it to or not. He picked up the phone. Same number as the night before. Chicago area code, but not one he knew. He let it ring. It stopped. Then 30 seconds later, a text appeared from the same number. Mr. Brooks, my name is Olivia Carter. I believe we met briefly yesterday evening at the Grand Meridian. I'd like to speak with you at your convenience. I apologize for the repeated calls. I understand this may feel intrusive. I assure you I mean no harm, and ask only for 15 minutes of your time. I'll be at Linden Coffee on Michigan Avenue from 8 until 9 this morning, if you're willing. He read it twice. Then he set the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. She'd found his number, which meant she'd found his name, which meant she had resources he hadn't accounted for when he'd walked out of that lobby, and she'd used them overnight, which meant she was either thorough by nature or unsettled enough by what happened to make thoroughness feel urgent. Probably both. He thought about not going. It was the easier choice and the smarter one, and he was aware of that. Whatever Olivia Carter was involved in, whatever had arranged 6 men in a hotel lobby with that kind of precision, it wasn't something he needed to be part of. He had a son to pick up at 3:15. He had a contractor's estimate on the kitchen table. He had a life that was small and manageable, and deliberately, carefully so. His alarm went off at 5:45. He silenced it and got up. Marcus ate cereal and talked about a project he had due on Friday that he hadn't started yet, in the particular way of a 9-year-old who is mentioning a thing without technically admitting the thing is a problem. Ethan listened and made coffee and packed a lunch and signed a permission slip that had been living in Marcus's backpack for apparently 11 days. And at 7:20 he dropped Marcus at the front entrance of Carver Elementary and watched him disappear through the double doors with his backpack listing to one side because one of the straps had broken and they hadn't fixed it yet. He sat in the school drop-off lane for a moment after the doors closed. Then he drove to Michigan Avenue. Linden Coffee was the kind of place that took its coffee seriously in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. Mismatched chairs, exposed brick, a chalkboard menu with too many options. Not the usual power meeting spot for someone running a company. He noticed that. Olivia Carter was already there, at a corner table, her back to the wall. She had a black coffee in front of her and she was reading something on her phone, but she looked up the moment he walked in, which meant she'd been watching the door and doing a decent job of appearing not to. She looked different from the night before, less polished on the surface. Her hair was down, she was wearing a dark coat over what looked like a simple sweater, but somehow more composed than she'd been in the lobby, like she'd slept and thought and arrived at some kind of decision about how she wanted to be in this conversation. He ordered a plain coffee at the counter and sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You said 15 minutes. I meant it." She put her phone face down on the table. "I had your name by 10 o'clock last night. I had your address by 11. I want to be honest with you about that because I think you'd find out anyway, and I'd rather start this by telling you the truth." He looked at her. "How?" "Security footage from the hotel. I own a small stake in the building. Old investment. So the access wasn't complicated. Your face, a reverse image search through a contractor my company uses, and then some very boring database work." She said it evenly, not proudly. "It took my assistant about 4 hours. That's faster than I'd like. You're in a smaller digital footprint than most people your age. Almost no social media, no professional profiles. That slowed things down." She paused. "You were Navy." "I did some service, yeah." She looked at him the same way she'd looked at him in the lobby. That focused, cataloging look. "The way you moved in that lobby wasn't some service, but that's not what I'm here to talk about." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "What are you here to talk about?" "I want to offer you a job." The silence that followed was exactly 2 seconds long. "No," he said. "You haven't heard what it is." Ms. Carter. Olivia. Olivia. He said it because she'd asked him to, not because it made things easier. I don't know what happened to you yesterday or why, and I'm sorry it happened, but whatever's going on in your life, that wasn't a random thing. Those men were placed. That was organized, which means whatever you're dealing with is the kind of thing that doesn't end after one bad night in a hotel lobby, and I have a son. She didn't flinch at that. She'd been expecting it, or something like it. Marcus, she said. 9 years old. Carver Elementary. You've been raising him alone since your wife passed 3 years ago. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger, exactly. More like the feeling of having a perimeter crossed that you'd assumed was marked. You went further than the security footage, he said. I needed to understand who I was asking. She held his gaze. I'm not saying that to justify it. I know it's a line, but yes, I went further. And what I found was a man who has been building something very careful and very steady for 3 years on not a lot of money, and who walked into a hotel lobby to pick up a contractor quote and ended the kind of situation that most trained professionals don't handle that cleanly. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to go back into whatever you left behind. I'm asking you to be the head of security for Carter Meridian Group. Salary, benefits, a schedule that works around a school pickup at 3:15. He stared at her. You know the pickup time. I've been thorough. You've been invasive. Yes, she said, simply, without hedging. I have, and I'm aware of it. You can walk out of here and I won't contact you again, but I'm hoping you'll hear me out instead. He didn't walk out. He hated that he didn't walk out. Talk, he said. She did. She told him about Carter Meridian Group, mid-size corporate holdings, mostly logistics infrastructure. A few tech contracts with municipal clients, nothing flashy. 38 employees. A security team of 4 people that was, by her own admission, built for access control and corporate image rather than anything real. Last night's incident was the 3rd in 6 weeks. A break-in at their data center that had been reported as a server malfunction, a car that had followed her home one evening and disappeared when she'd pulled into a monitored parking garage, and now the lobby. She'd reported all 3 to law enforcement. They were being looked into. Nothing had come of it. Have you told anyone inside the company? He asked. My COO knows about the car. He thinks I'm being paranoid. What do you think? She picked up her coffee and took a careful sip before she answered. I think paranoid people don't have 6 men show up in a hotel lobby. He couldn't argue with that. He asked her about the men from the night before. She'd spoken to police that morning, but 2 of the 3 from the floor had been taken in for questioning. One of them had already lawyered up before processing was done, and the 3 who'd walked out the entrance were still unidentified. No one was talking. The preliminary read from the detective handling it was that it looked like a targeted attempted abduction, possibly related to a business dispute. A business dispute, Ethan repeated. That's the language he used. What kind of business dispute ends with 6 men in a hotel lobby? The kind I apparently have, she said. He studied her face. She wasn't performing calm. This was the real thing, the kind that comes from a person who has been afraid enough times that they've learned to function alongside it rather than through it. He'd seen that in people who'd been in operational environments for too long. He hadn't expected to see it in a 30-year-old CEO in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, and the fact that it was there told him something. Why me? He said. You have resources. You could hire a firm. I could, she agreed. I've had 2 conversations with firms this week. They want to put a team around me and call it done. That's not what I need. What do you need? Someone who walks into a room and sees what's actually happening, not what the room is supposed to look like. She said it without dramatizing it. Last night you saw 6 men coordinating in a lobby before anyone else noticed anything was wrong. That's not something you hire at a firm. That's something a person either has or doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop had filled up a little. 2 women with laptops near the window. A man on a phone call he was clearly trying to conduct quietly and failing at. Ordinary Tuesday morning. Nobody looking at them. What's the salary? He said. She told him. He made himself not react to the number. He thought about the contractor's estimate on the kitchen table and Marcus's broken backpack strap and the kitchen that had needed renovation since before Claire got sick. That's high for a security director position, he said. I know what I'm asking for, she said, and I know it comes with risk I'm not pretending isn't there. You'd be taking on something that isn't a normal security job, and you deserve to be compensated for knowing that up front. I need to think about it. Of course. If I say yes, I have conditions. Tell me. My son comes first. Every time. No exceptions. No negotiations. If he needs me, I leave. If he's sick, I'm not available. If there's a school thing, I go to the school thing. Understood. I work the way I work. I don't clear my methods through a committee. Within legal limits, she said. Within legal limits, he agreed, and I have full access to every corner of your operation. Personnel files, vendor contracts, building access logs, all of it. If I'm going to find what's wrong, I need to be able to see everything. She held his gaze for a steady moment. He had the impression she was measuring something. Not whether she trusted him, but whether she was ready to accept what came with trusting him. Agreed, she said. He drank the last of his coffee. It had gone slightly cold. I'll call you by end of day. I'll answer. He stood up, pulled on his jet jacket. He was halfway to the door when she spoke again. He sounds like a good kid, Marcus. She said it quietly, not like she was using it, just like it had come out. He stopped but didn't turn around. He is. He walked out. He didn't call by end of day. He called at 2:40, 20 minutes before Marcus's pickup. Yes, he said when she picked up. Okay, she said. I start Monday. I'll have everything ready. He hung up and drove to Carver Elementary and sat in the pickup line watching parents he half recognized talk to each other across their car windows, the ordinary machinery of other people's afternoons. And he thought about what he'd just agreed to and whether it made sense. And he concluded, honestly, that it probably didn't, and that he was going to do it anyway. Marcus came out through the double doors with his backpack listing. He climbed into the back seat and said, You're early. Yeah. Are you okay? Stop asking me that. You keep making the face. What face? The one where you look like you're doing math. Ethan pulled out of the school lane into traffic. We're getting your backpack fixed this week. That's random. I know. Marcus looked at him in the rearview mirror for a long moment, then apparently decided to let it go. He pulled out a library book and started reading, feet up on the back of the passenger seat, and Ethan drove through the afternoon with the radio off and the city moving past the windows. And somewhere in the next 3 miles, he stopped second-guessing himself and just let the decision sit. Carter Meridian Group occupied the upper 6 floors of a building on Walker Drive, practical, functional, nowhere near the glass and steel spectacle of some of the bigger firms nearby. The lobby had art on the walls that someone had clearly chosen carefully, and the elevator required a key card above the 23rd floor, and the security desk had a monitor setup that looked thorough until you spent 4 minutes looking at it, at which point it was obvious that 2 of the 6 cameras on display were pointed at angles that created a dead zone the size of a small conference room near the eastern stairwell. Ethan noticed it on his first morning and said nothing. Olivia met him on the 27th floor. She walked him through the space herself. The open office, the executive wing, the data room, the secondary server cluster that ran the building's internal communications infrastructure. She introduced him to her COO, a man named Richard Hale, who shook Ethan's hand with the specific energy of a person who has been told to welcome someone and is not happy about it. So you're our new head of security, Hale said. That's right. We've had a security team for 11 years, never needed a director position. Okay, Ethan said. Hale looked at him like he'd expected more of a response. Ethan didn't have a more of a response to give him. He moved on. The existing security team was 4 people. A man named Garrett, who was ex-cop, broad and competent in the way that building security tends to produce, and 3 younger staff who handled access control and visitor logging. They were fine for what they'd been asked to do, which was not very much. Garrett shook Ethan's hand with a firmness that was testing something, and Ethan let it be whatever it was. He spent his first 2 days reading personnel files, vendor contracts, the access logs for the past 3 months, the incident reports for the data center break-in. He He read them at a desk in the security office with the door open and a cup of coffee from the break room that was substantially worse than the place on Michigan Avenue. On the third day, he asked to see the footage from the night of the data center incident. Garrett pulled it up without comment. Ethan watched 42 minutes of footage in 11 minutes, running it at 4 times speed, and then he paused it at the 31-minute mark and leaned forward. "Who authorized the maintenance crew?" he said. Garrett frowned at the screen. "What?" "There." Ethan pointed at the lower right corner of the frame, where a man in a gray work shirt was moving through a corridor that shouldn't have had foot traffic during a server maintenance window. "That's not your maintenance crew. That's someone who knew when the maintenance crew would be there and used the window." Garrett stared at the screen. "The system logged the maintenance authorization at—" "I know what the log says. The log was pre-entered to create a cover window. Look at the badge he's scanning. That's a visitor badge from 3 days earlier. Someone kept it live in the system." He could see Garrett working through it. The man wasn't slow. He was just looking at footage he'd already reviewed and finding something he'd missed, which was a different kind of uncomfortable than finding nothing. "You got that from 40 minutes of video," Garrett said. 31. A pause. "What else did you find?" "I'll tell you when I'm sure of it," Ethan said. "Nothing moves outside this room until I am." Garrett looked at him for a moment with an expression that was recalibrating. Then he nodded. That evening, Ethan stayed late, after the office had emptied, and sat in front of the access log system and built a timeline that went back further than 3 months. He found 4 anomalies, but small, spaced apart, the kind of irregularities that look like system errors when you're not looking for a pattern and look like something else entirely when you are. He was still building the timeline when Olivia appeared in the doorway, at 8:15, a coat over her arm, clearly on her way out. She stopped. "You're still here." "So are you." "I had a board call until 8. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at his screen. "What are you looking at?" "Access pattern from the last 8 months. Someone's been in and out of your system at intervals that are designed to look random." She came further into the room. She looked at the screen with the same focused attention he'd noticed before. Not pretending to understand what she was seeing, but genuinely trying to. "In the building," she said. "In the building and in the digital infrastructure. Both. They're running parallel, which means this isn't one person doing freelance work." He turned in the chair to look at her. "You have an inside problem. At least one person on your staff is either working with whoever this is or feeding information to them." She went still. Not shocked. More like a person who has been expecting a specific kind of bad news and has finally heard it said out loud. "Do you know who?" she asked. "Not yet." She was quiet for a moment. The office was empty around them, the ambient hum of the building at night, the city visible through the windows in long orange and white lines. "What do you need?" she said. "Time. And I need you to act normally. Don't change anything in how you run your day. Don't tell anyone what we talked about. Don't look at anyone differently in a meeting. If there's someone inside, the moment they feel the pattern shift, they'll go quiet and I'll lose the thread." She absorbed that. "How long?" "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe. Depends on what they do next." "And if they do something before you find the thread?" "That's why I'm here," he said. She looked at him for a moment. That same measuring look. But something had changed in it from the coffee shop. There was less calculation in it now, and something harder to name, something that had to do with a person deciding they were going to trust another person and doing it with their eyes open. "Okay," she said. She left. He heard the elevator doors open and close down the hall. He turned back to the screen and kept building the timeline. The first 3 weeks at Carter Meridian passed with the surface appearance of an ordinary workplace. Emails and meetings, and a printer on the 26th floor that jammed every Tuesday without fail, and Richard Hale, who continued to regard Ethan with the specific hostility of a man who has decided not to like someone and is committed to being consistent about it. Ethan paid attention to Hale the way he paid attention to everything, not with suspicion exactly, but with the steady, patient noting of things that might matter later. Marcus, for his part, had formed an opinion about all of this that he communicated through his standard method of asking a single direct question and then letting it sit. "Are you doing something dangerous?" he asked one evening, over a dinner that Ethan had not made very well. "What makes you ask that?" You've been leaving early and coming home late, and you've had the math face every night for 2 weeks. I have a new job, Ethan said. New jobs take adjustment time. Mom used to say that. She was right. Marcus poked at his food. She also used to say you were bad at lying. Ethan looked at his son across the table, 9 years old, with his mother's amber eyes and her infuriating accuracy about people. And Ethan felt the familiar wash of something that had no clean name. Love and grief and pride, and the particular ache of seeing a person who is irrefutably themselves, even at 9 years old. It's not dangerous, Ethan said. It's complicated. There's a difference. Okay, Marcus said, in a tone that made clear he was filing this under unresolved and would be returning to it. You need a new backpack, Ethan said. I've needed a new backpack for 3 months. We'll get one Saturday. Marcus looked at him. Promise? Promise. They got the backpack on Saturday. Marcus chose a dark green one with too many pockets, and Ethan paid for it with the first paycheck from Carter Meridian, and they ate lunch at a counter restaurant where the soup was good, and Marcus talked for 20 straight minutes about a book he was reading, and Ethan listened to every word. On Sunday evening, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from an internal company alert system he'd set up the week before, a flag on an access point in the data room. Someone had attempted a login at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday using credentials that belonged to an employee who was, according to the HR system, on vacation in Florida. He sat in his kitchen for a moment. Then he texted Olivia. Something moved. I'll explain Monday. Don't come in early. She replied 3 minutes later. Understood. He set the phone down and looked at the kitchen around him. The contractor's estimate still in its envelope on the counter, the renovation still somewhere in the future, the life he was building incrementally out of available materials. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was the one he had, and he'd made a kind of peace with the distance between those two things, most days. He thought about the access flag, about the visitor badge that had been kept live in the system, about 6 men in a hotel lobby who'd walked out instead of running because they had protocols. Someone was running a long operation against Olivia Carter. They were patient, and they were careful, and they were inside the walls, and they had been at it long enough to be comfortable, which meant they didn't know yet that the walls had changed. Ethan turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He slept 4 hours, and when the alarm went off at 5:45, he was already thinking about Monday. Monday came in gray and cold, the kind of Chicago morning that doesn't bother announcing itself, just arrives and settles in like it owns the place. Ethan was at his desk on the 27th floor by 7:15, 45 minutes before the first staff member was scheduled to arrive. He dropped Marcus at school early, the before care program that cost an extra $40 a month, and that Marcus tolerated without complaint because he'd learned, in the way children of single parents learn things, that some arrangements exist because the alternative is harder to explain. He had the access log from Sunday night open on his left monitor and the personnel database open on his right, and he was doing what he'd been doing for 3 weeks, reading the space between things, the gaps and overlaps that didn't show up on any single report but became visible when you laid enough of them side by side. The Sunday night login attempt had come from inside the building. That was the part he hadn't told Olivia yet, because he'd wanted to be certain before he said it. The IP trace put the attempt at a workstation on the 25th floor, the logistics and vendor management team. The credentials used belonged to a woman named Sandra Ellison, 53, 11 years with the company, currently in Clearwater, Florida, with her daughter's family. Her login credentials had been copied at some point and stored somewhere accessible to whoever had used them Sunday night. Credential theft was patient work. It meant someone had been inside the system long enough and carefully enough to extract authentication data without triggering any of the existing monitoring protocols, which meant they understood the monitoring protocols, which meant they'd either built them, audited them, or been told about them. Ethan made a list of everyone who had touched the security infrastructure in the past 2 years. It was a shorter list than it should have been for a company this size. 6 names, including Garrett, including the external IT vendor that Carter Meridian used for their network maintenance, and including, at the bottom, Richard Hale, who had signed off on the vendor contract and who had, as COO, administrative override access to every system in the building. He didn't write Hale's name in any larger font than the others. He just noted it and moved on. Olivia arrived at 8:10. She came directly to the security office without stopping at her own desk, which told him she'd been thinking about his Sunday text all night. She had a coffee from somewhere that wasn't the break room, and she looked like a person who had slept badly and decided not to acknowledge it. "Tell me," she said, sitting down across from him. He told her. All of it. The credential theft, the workstation location, the profile of someone who understood the monitoring setup. He did not tell her his short list yet. He told her the shape of the problem first, because in his experience, people absorbed the shape better before they were handed specific names, especially when those names might belong to people they'd worked alongside for years. She listened without interrupting. That was something he had noticed about her in the past 3 weeks. She had the discipline to actually listen, not the kind of listening that is really just waiting for a pause to respond, but the real kind, where the face shows the information going in and being processed. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long have they had access?" she said. "At minimum 4 months, possibly longer. The earliest anomaly I can definitively tie to external manipulation is from late spring, but the groundwork, the credential setup, the access mapping, that could have started earlier, and I just can't see it from what's available." "What are they looking for?" "That's what I don't know yet." He turned one of the monitors toward her. "Your most sensitive data assets are the municipal contract files and the logistics network architecture. Those are the things that would be worth money to a competitor, or leverage to someone who wanted to move against you operationally." "Or both," she said. "Or both." She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at him. "You said the workstation was on 25. That's vendor management." "Yes." "Who do you think it is?" He had known she would ask. He'd been deciding, since Sunday night, how much of his working theory to share at this stage, and he'd landed on the position that she deserved honesty over the comfort of being managed. "I have a short list," he said. "I'm not going to give you names yet, because if I'm wrong about someone, that's a person's career and it doesn't come back from it easily. What I need is another week to narrow the access window." She didn't like that. He could see it, the small tightening around her eyes, the slight forward shift of her posture. She wanted the name. It was human to want the name. "1 week," she said. "Maybe less. And until then, I just go to my meetings and pretend everything is fine." "You're very good at that," he said, and then caught himself, because it had come out more directly than he'd intended. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile. "That's either a compliment or an observation." "Both, I think." Something moved across her face, a brief, real thing, gone before it fully arrived. She picked up her coffee and stood. "1 week," she said again. "Then I want the list." She left. He turned back to the monitors and got back to work. What? The week unfolded with the particular tension of a situation where the danger is present but not visible, like pressure building in a sealed room. Ethan moved through the office in the way he'd learned to move through any environment that required both presence and invisibility. He was there. He was approachable. He learned the rhythms of the floor, which printer everyone used and which conference room had bad acoustics, and who ate lunch at their desk and who took the stairs instead of the elevator. He let people get used to him, because people who are used to you stop adjusting their behavior around you, and that adjustment gap is where you learn things. The vendor management team on 25 was 11 people. He found reasons to interact with most of them over 4 days. A building access form that needed updating, a question about the visitor log process, a fire drill protocol review. He was looking for the particular quality of a person managing a secondary layer of awareness, the way someone who is hiding something has to maintain a kind of internal split between the face they're showing and the calculation running underneath. 3 of the 11 showed minor variants of that quality. He noted all 3 and kept moving. On Thursday morning, the second incident happened. He found out about it not through the monitoring system, but through Garrett, who appeared in the doorway of the security office at 7:50 with an expression that had moved past uncomfortable into genuinely unsettled. "There was a car," Garrett said, "last night, in the parking structure, level 2. It was there when the last staff member left at 9:40, gone by the time the overnight security pass happened at 11. But the camera on level 2 had a service outage between 9:15 and 10:30. Ethan looked at him. Planned outage? That's what the maintenance log says, scheduled camera service. Who scheduled it? Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. The log shows it was authorized through the vendor management system. I'm trying to pull who entered the work order. I'll do it, Ethan said. Get me the camera ID and the work order number. He had it in 40 minutes. The work order had been entered using an internal administrative account that was supposed to be used only for facilities management, a shared credential, rotating password, managed through the vendor system. The work order had been entered 4 days earlier, before anyone could have known there would be anything worth hiding on level 2 on Thursday night, which meant whoever had parked that car had planned to be there 4 days in advance. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he pulled the vendor management access logs for the day. The work order was entered and cross-referenced them against the schedule database to see who was in the building at their workstation during the window the order was created. 4 people. One of the 4 was Richard Hale. He stared at the screen. He was aware of the difference between a name appearing on a list and a name meaning something, and he was careful about that distinction, had always been careful about it, because confirmation bias was the thing that got people killed in the field, the tendency to find what you were already looking for once you started looking for it. But Hale's name had come up twice now, and the car in the parking structure hadn't been there for nothing. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 4 times. Then, Brooks. The voice was flat and a little hoarse, the voice of a man who had smoked too much in his 30s and was in his late 40s now and still carried it. Decker, Ethan said. I need a favor. Dennis Decker had been Ethan's intelligence liaison on his last 2 deployments, a defense intelligence analyst who had since moved into private consulting, which was the polite way of saying he did background work for people who needed background work done without the paperwork. Ethan hadn't called him since Claire's funeral, when Decker had shown up unannounced and stayed for exactly 45 minutes and said almost nothing, and somehow that had been exactly right. What kind of favor? Decker said. Corporate background. Financial trail offshore if there is one, possible outside affiliations. One name. Company name or personal? Personal. COO of a mid-sized Chicago firm. A pause. You working private sector now? Yes. Huh. Another pause, the sound of something being moved on a desk. Send me what you have. I'll see what I can find that isn't in the public record. I need it fast. Define fast. 48 hours. You always did have a charming sense of what's reasonable, Decker said, and hung up. Numbed. Ethan gave Olivia a condensed version of the parking structure incident that afternoon. He told her about the work order, the access window, the coordinated camera outage. He did not tell her about Decker or the name he'd sent him, because there was a principle he held to in this kind of work. You didn't point at a person until you were ready to put evidence behind the point, and he wasn't there yet. She took it the way she'd been taking everything, steadily, with the visible effort of someone managing a fear they've decided not to be governed by. What was the car? She asked. Dark blue sedan? No plates on the level 2 footage that we have. The entrance camera got a partial on the way in. I've got someone running it. Someone being someone I trust, he said, outside the building. She absorbed that. She understood what it meant, that he didn't trust everyone inside the building, and she let it sit without demanding more detail, which he was grateful for. There's something else, she said. He waited. I've been thinking about the timing. The hotel incident was 6 weeks after the data center break-in. The car following me was in between. And now this. She had a habit, when she was thinking through something, of very slightly turning a ring on her right hand. Not nervously, just a small physical anchor. He'd noticed it in meetings. They're escalating. Each incident is closer to me than the last one. Yes, he said. Why? If they want something from the company, data, leverage, whatever, why escalate toward me personally? That's a different kind of pressure than a data breach. It was a good question. He'd been turning it over for days. Because something changed, he said. Whatever they originally wanted from the company, either they got it and now they want something else, or they didn't get it and they've decided direct pressure on you is the faster route. Direct pressure to do what? I don't know yet. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the office windows, the city moved in its ordinary way. Traffic and pedestrians, and the gray November sky pressing down on everything. My company has a major shareholder meeting in 3 weeks, she said. The Halverson Group is trying to push a board restructure. They've been buying up minority shares for 6 months. He looked at her. You didn't mention that before. I didn't think it was connected. She paused. I'm starting to think maybe it is. The Halverson Group. He wrote it down. Tell me about them. She told him. A private equity operation based in New York, about 5 years old, aggressive acquisition strategy, mostly targeting mid-sized companies in logistics and infrastructure. They'd approached her twice in the past year about a merger, and she'd declined both times. After the second decline, they'd started buying shares through intermediaries, slowly enough to stay below the reporting threshold. Who runs them? He said. A man named Conrad Voss. She paused, choosing a word. Deliberate, patient. He doesn't do anything quickly that he can do slowly and more effectively. Ethan thought about 6 men positioned in a hotel lobby with rehearsed lines and protocols for a clean retreat, about credential theft running for 4 months under the radar, about camera outages scheduled 4 days in advance, patient, deliberate, a man who planned things in layers. I need everything you have on Halverson and on Voss, he said. Publicly available and anything your legal team has from the merger conversations. I'll have it to you by tonight. And Olivia. He said her name and then waited until she looked at him directly. I need you to be more careful about your physical movement for the next 2 weeks. Vary your routes. Don't announce your schedule outside the office. If you have evening events, I need to know in advance. She looked at him steadily. You think they'll try again? I think the parking structure was reconnaissance, he said. I think they were looking at something specific. I want to make sure they don't get a second look at it. She nodded once, the deliberate nod of someone making a commitment rather than just acknowledging information. Okay, Kassem. Decker came back in 31 hours, which was 17 hours faster than promised, and which told Ethan that what he'd found was interesting enough to move on. He sent a file. Ethan read it at his kitchen table after Marcus was in bed, the house quiet around him, a glass of water at his elbow that he kept forgetting to drink. Richard Hale had, 3 years ago, been a managing director at a consulting firm called Prentice Aldwell. Prentice Aldwell had been acquired 2 years ago by a holding entity. The holding entity had 2 majority investors. One of them was a shell company incorporated in Delaware. The Delaware company had, through 2 more layers of incorporation, a beneficial owner. Conrad Voss. Ethan sat back in his chair. Hale had come to Carter Meridian 18 months ago, recommended by a board member who had since retired. His performance reviews were strong. Olivia had, by all accounts, trusted him. He'd been in the room for every significant strategic conversation the company had had in a year and a half. He'd been placed there. Ethan was now sure of it, not speculating, not inferring. The financial trail was a straight line once you found the starting point, and Decker had found the starting point. He texted Decker. Can you verify the Delaware filing date against Hale's hire date at Carter Meridian? Decker replied in 8 minutes. Delaware entity filed 4 months before Hale's interview. Acquisition of Prentice Aldwell completed 2 months before that. Timeline runs clean. Ethan looked at the timeline on his screen. Voss had structured this 22 months ago, at minimum. He'd placed Hale inside the company, let him build trust. And then, when the direct merger approaches failed and Olivia had refused to be moved, he'd started using Hale to systematically weaken the company from inside. Data, credentials, access points. Building the case for a board restructure by making the company look vulnerable and mismanaged. And when that wasn't moving fast enough, he'd added the physical pressure, the hotel, the car, the parking structure, to create fear or compliance or a mistake. It was sophisticated, it was patient, and it had very nearly worked because none of it, viewed in isolation, looked like a coordinated attack. It looked like a company having a bad streak. He called Olivia. It was 11:20 at night. She picked up on the second ring. You found something. I found everything, he said. He could hear her go still on the other end of the line, Not the held breath stillness of fear, but something harder and colder than that. "Tell me," she said. He did. He gave her the whole shape of it. Voss, Hale, the Delaware entity, the timeline, the pattern of access violations laid against the history of Halverson's share acquisition. He gave it to her straight, no softening, because she was not a person who needed softening, and he had learned that about her. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that he said, "Olivia." "I'm here," she said. "I'm processing." A pause. "Richard Hale has been to my apartment for dinner. He was at my mother's birthday last year." There was nothing useful he could say to that. He let the silence hold. "I trusted him," she said. Not angrily. Something more tired than anger. "I know." "Does he know that we know?" "No, and that matters. It means we control the timing. We choose when this comes out, not him." She went quiet again. When she came back, there was something different in her voice. Not composed exactly, but resolute. The particular tone of a person who has finished being hurt and started being deliberate. "What do we do?" she said. "We let him keep working," Ethan said. "For now. We document everything from here forward, every access, every communication we can legally capture, every move he makes. We build the evidentiary record, we get it in front of the right people, and we pick the moment carefully. The shareholder meeting is in 3 weeks. I know, whatever Voss is planning, that's the deadline. The board restructure vote is the mechanism. Everything they've been doing, the data access, the pressure on you personally, it's all designed to arrive at that meeting with enough leverage to force a vote that goes their way. So we have 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks, he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Ethan." "Yeah. Thank you." She said it plainly, without decoration. "I haven't finished yet," he said. "I know. Thank you anyway." He hung up and sat in his kitchen for a while, in the quiet. Through the window over the sink, he could see the neighbor's porch light and a strip of night sky between the buildings, a few stars visible through the city glow. He thought about Voss, a man he'd never met, who had spent nearly 2 years building a trap that was careful and patient and very nearly invisible. He thought about Hale sitting at Olivia's dinner table, passing bread or pouring wine, while somewhere in the back of his skull he was running a different calculation entirely. He'd met men like that in the field. Not many. Enough. They relied on the assumption that the world around them was not looking. That was always the foundation. The arrogance of the long operation. The belief that patience made you invisible. Ethan finished his water. He washed the glass and set it in the drying rack and turned off the kitchen light. They'd been running this for 22 months, and nobody had been looking. 3 weeks was enough time. It had to be. The next 10 days moved in a rhythm of controlled patience that cost him more than he let show. He watched Hale in meetings, the careful neutrality of a man who had learned to make himself look like background noise. He watched the access logs every morning for the shape of what Hale was moving and where. He coordinated with Decker on a secondary track of financial documentation, building the paper architecture that would need to exist before any of this was usable in a legal context. He also, during this period, had a conversation with Marcus that he hadn't planned on having. It was a Saturday morning, and they were in the backyard, such as it was, a narrow strip of grass between the house and the alley fence, and Marcus was kicking a soccer ball against the fence in the repetitive, meditative way he did when something was on his mind. Ethan was on the back step with coffee, watching him and not pretending not to watch him. After about 10 minutes of this, Marcus stopped kicking the ball and sat down on the grass. "Is the lady from your job nice?" he asked. Ethan looked at him. "What lady?" "The one you work for, Olivia." He'd mentioned her name once, in passing, 2 weeks ago. Marcus had apparently filed it. "She's—" "Yes," Ethan said. "She's a good person." "Do you like her?" He took a sip of coffee. "She's my employer, Marcus." "That's not what I asked." He looked at his son, who was sitting on the frozen November grass with the patient, unbothered expression of a person who has asked a clear question and is content to wait for a clear answer. "She's someone I respect," Ethan said carefully. "Okay," Marcus said, in the tone that meant he had heard what was said and also what wasn't said, and was going to let both of them sit for a while. He picked up the soccer ball and started kicking it against the fence again. Ethan finished his coffee. He didn't think about the comment for the rest of the day. He thought about it the following morning and then put it away, because there was too much happening and the shareholder meeting was now 12 days out, and whatever was in the space between employer and what Marcus had actually been asking about, that was a conversation for a different season. On day 11, Hale made his move. Ethan caught it at 6 in the morning. A data package, compressed and encrypted, staged in a server partition that wasn't supposed to have user-level write access. The package contained board communication records, financial projections for the next 2 quarters, and the confidential proxy materials for the upcoming shareholder meeting. It was the kind of package that, in the right hands 3 days before a board vote, could be used to undermine Olivia's position completely, either by leaking selectively to create a narrative of mismanagement, or by giving Voss's people enough inside knowledge to argue for the restructure from an apparently informed position. It hadn't been transmitted yet. It was staged, waiting, probably for a window similar to the Sunday night credential attempt, a quiet moment when outbound traffic wouldn't trip anything. Ethan sat in front of the screen and breathed steadily. He had what he needed. He had the financial trail from Decker, the access log pattern going back 8 months, the credential theft, the work order for the camera outage, and now this, a staged data package that could only have been assembled by someone with Hale's level of access and knowledge of the board materials. He picked up his phone and called Olivia. She answered before the second ring. It was 6:14 in the morning and she sounded completely awake. He staged a data pull, Ethan said. It's sitting on the server right now, unsent. I need you to come in early. Bring your legal counsel if you can reach them this morning. A silence. Then, I can have our outside counsel there by 8. 8 works. Don't use the building communication system to reach them. Call from your personal phone. Understood. Another pause. Is it enough? It's enough, he said. He heard her exhale, a single controlled breath that was the closest thing to relief he'd heard from her in 3 weeks. I'll be there at 7:30, she said. He kept the screen up and watched the staged package sit in the server partition, dormant and patient, exactly like the man who had put it there. 11 days before the shareholder meeting, the operation Voss had spent 22 months building had just run out of room. The 8 o'clock meeting happened in the small conference room on the 27th floor, the one with the window that faced north, away from the street, which Ethan had chosen deliberately because it had no line of sight from any neighboring building above the 20th floor. Olivia's outside counsel was a woman named Patricia Vane, mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, the kind of lawyer who came in already reading and didn't stop. She had a paralegal with her who set up a laptop without being asked and kept it open and running for the entire meeting. Garrett was there. Ethan had decided to bring him in fully. He'd earned it, and he was going to be needed. Ethan walked them through everything: the access log pattern, the credential theft, the work order for the camera outage, the financial trail Decker had constructed linking Hale to Voss through the Delaware entity, and the Prentice Aldwell acquisition. The staged data package currently sitting on the server partition, untransmitted, documented, time-stamped. Patricia Vane listened the way good lawyers listen, absolutely still, making almost no notes because she was storing it, and occasionally asking a question so precise it reframed everything around it. When he finished, she looked at her paralegal, then back at Ethan. The financial documentation. You said a private source. A former federal analyst. The underlying records are public filings. He assembled the chain. Can he testify to the methodology? If it comes to that, yes. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The staged data package is the strongest piece in terms of immediate legal utility. It's physical evidence of an ongoing action, it's company property, and it hasn't been transmitted, which matters for how it gets characterized. She paused. You've been documenting the access log anomalies in real time? Every entry has a timestamp and a preservation copy on an air-gapped drive. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. It was a look that recalibrated him slightly upward on whatever scale she used. Okay, she said. Here's the problem. What you have is enough to support a civil action and probably enough to support a referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. But it doesn't happen overnight. The shareholder meeting is in 11 days. 10, Ethan said. 10, she agreed. And if Hale transmits that package before we can move, the damage could be significant even if we win the legal battle afterward. Leaked board materials ahead of a proxy vote, even if they're later discredited, create a narrative that's hard to walk back. Olivia, who had been sitting at the end of the table with her hands flat on the surface and her face very still, said, "So what do we do?" "We move in 2 tracks simultaneously," Patricia said. "I start the referral to the FBI today. I have a contact in the field office who handles financial crimes and corporate fraud. And the structure of what you've described is exactly the kind of thing that gets their attention. That buys us federal involvement, which creates pressure on Voss's people in New York." She closed the folder in front of her. "And you," she looked at Ethan, "make sure that data package never leaves the building." "It won't," he said. "Can you isolate the server partition without alerting Hale that it's been found?" "Yes, I can create a mirror. He'll see the package as staged and accessible from his end, but anything he sends will route to a capture system instead of out. He'll think he transmitted it successfully." Patricia looked at him again with the same recalibrating expression. "Do that today." "It's already set up," he said. A pause. "You did that before this meeting." "Before I called Olivia this morning." Olivia turned to look at him. He didn't have a good explanation for why he'd prepared for the conversation before having it, other than that, in his experience, the best time to build a net was before you needed to catch something. "All right, boss," Patricia said. She was already standing, already closing her briefcase. "I'll make the call to the FBI contact this morning. You'll hear from me by end of day with next steps. In the meantime, nobody talks to Hale differently. Nobody looks at him differently. He stays where he is until we have federal involvement confirmed." She left with her paralegal, both of them reading as they walked. The room was quiet for a moment. Garrett exhaled slowly through his nose. Olivia looked at the table. "He's going to be in the staff meeting at 10, she said. "Richard? He's presenting the vendor contract renewals." "I know," Ethan said. "I have to sit across from him for 45 minutes." "I know." She looked up. There was something in her face that was not quite anger and not quite grief. Something in between, the specific emotion of betrayal that has had time to become a decision about what happens next. "I can do it," she said. It wasn't a question. She was telling herself as much as him. "I know you can," he said. Garrett stood. "I'll run the server mirror from the secondary terminal so it doesn't show in the primary access log." "Good," Ethan said. "Use the maintenance credential I set up last week. It's a clean path." Garrett nodded and left. And then it was just Ethan and Olivia in the conference room with the north-facing window and the gray morning light coming in flat and even. And she looked at him for a moment with an expression that was tired and deliberate, and something else underneath that neither of them had vocabulary for yet. "Go to your meeting," he said quietly. She went. The 10 days that followed were the particular kind of hard that doesn't come from single dramatic moments, but from the sustained effort of maintaining a surface while a completely different set of forces operates underneath. Ethan watched Hale in every meeting, every corridor interaction, every casual exchange at the coffee station. He watched him check his phone and look at his screen and walk to the elevator, and none of it showed. Hale was good, genuinely good, the product of a long operation run by someone who had selected him carefully. The FBI field office moved faster than Patricia had predicted. By day 3, there were 2 agents, a woman named Special Agent Reyes and a man named Kowalski, both financial crimes, both the kind of federal agent who wears the same expression in every room, which is to say no expression at all, conducting what was being described internally as a routine audit consultation. They were in the building. They had the documentation package Ethan and Patricia had assembled. They were building their own parallel record. On day 6, Hale attempted to transmit the data package. Ethan saw it happen in real time on his monitor. The outbound request, the apparent transmission, the clean confirmation that Hale's system returned to him. What actually happened was that the data routed directly into the capture system Garrett had built from Ethan's framework, where it was logged, preserved, and added to the evidentiary record. Ethan texted Patricia. He transmitted, "We have it." Her reply came in 4 minutes. "Reyes knows." Hold position. He held position. 4 days before the shareholder meeting, Conrad Voss arrived in Chicago. Ethan found out from Decker, who had maintained a monitoring thread on Halverson Group's operational activity, and flagged a flight manifest and a hotel reservation at the Langham on Tuesday morning. He told Olivia. She was in her office, standing at the window with a coffee that had probably gone cold, looking at the city below with the expression of a person who has been bracing for something and has just been told it's arrived. "He came himself," she said. "That's either confidence or desperation," Ethan said. "I'm not sure which." "With Voss, it's probably both." She turned from the window. "The board meeting's in 4 days. He's here to make sure the vote goes his way. He's here because the data package was transmitted, and he thinks he has what he needs." Ethan sat down across from her desk, which he rarely did. He usually stood. He doesn't know yet that the package went into a capture system. As far as his operation is concerned, everything is on track. She sat down behind her desk. They were at the same level now, eye to eye. "And the FBI?" she said. "Reyes told Patricia they're ready to move at the right moment. They want Voss in the country when they do. Jurisdiction is cleaner." "So the shareholder event is the moment?" "It may be. Or Reyes may move before it. I don't control that timeline." Olivia looked at him steadily. "But you have a plan for what happens if Voss moves first." It wasn't a question. She'd learned to read him well enough by now to know when he had a contingency and when he was working without one. He had one. "The shareholder event is in the Caldwell Center," he said. "We've been running security for that venue for 2 weeks. I added it to our contract scope when the meeting was scheduled, so our team has full building access and familiarity with the layout. If Voss brings muscle, and based on what he did at the Grand Meridian he will, I want to know the floor before they do." "How many people are you expecting?" "Unknown. The Grand Meridian was 6 men. He'll calibrate to the venue." He paused. "The Caldwell Center has 4 main access points, 2 service entrances, and a loading dock that connects to the underground parking. I've already been through all of them." She was quiet for a moment, processing the architecture of what he was describing. Then, "I have 230 people at that event, board members, shareholders, staff." "I know." "If something goes wrong in that room, nothing goes wrong in that room," he said. It came out more definitely than he'd planned, and he knew as he said it that it was the kind of certainty you weren't supposed to offer because the world doesn't honor it. But he meant it, and she needed to hear it meant, not measured. She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "But..." The night before the shareholder meeting, Ethan sat with Marcus at the kitchen table and helped him finish a history project about the construction of the Panama Canal that was due the following week, but that Marcus had decided, with the particular logic of a 9-year-old, needed to be done tonight. They sat with index cards and a library book and a laptop open to a website about canal engineering, and Marcus asked questions and Ethan answered them, and somewhere around 9 o'clock Marcus fell asleep in his chair with his head tilted against the wall and his pencil still in his hand, and Ethan sat across from him for a while in the kitchen quiet. He thought about tomorrow. He thought about the Caldwell Center's floor plan, which he had memorized to the point where he could walk it in his sleep. He thought about Voss, a man he'd been studying for 10 days through Decker's documentation and Patricia's legal briefings, and the shape of what the man had built over 2 years. Patient, deliberate, layered, the kind of person who did not accept outcomes he hadn't planned for. He thought about what happens when a patient, deliberate person runs out of plan. He carried Marcus to bed. Marcus half woke in transit, mumbled something about the Panama Canal locks, and was asleep again before Ethan had the blanket over him. Ethan stood in the doorway of his son's room for a moment, the way he sometimes did when Marcus was asleep, and the house was quiet, and it was possible to look at this small, particular person without the day's business getting in the way. Then he went to bed and slept 3 hours and was up at 4:30, moving through the dark house with the focused quiet of a man who has been in harder rooms than this one and come out. The Caldwell Center was a conference and event facility on the north end of the Loop. 3 floors, a main ballroom that held 500, 4 breakout rooms on the second level, and a glass atrium entrance that was beautiful and from a security standpoint a problem because it was visible from 3 sides. Ethan and Garrett arrived at 6 in the morning for a final walk of the building. They'd done this twice already in the past week, but the morning of walk was different. You were looking for what had changed overnight, what was new, what was where it shouldn't be. The loading dock had a delivery van that hadn't been there during the previous walk. Ethan checked the vendor manifest and found the van, a floral supplier for the event decor, scheduled for an 8 a.m. delivery. He called the florist directly from the dock. The owner answered on the third ring, half awake, and confirmed the van and gave him the driver's name. Ethan checked it against the vendor credentialing list he'd submitted to the building manager 2 weeks ago. The name matched. He moved on. By 8:30, he had placed Garrett at the main entrance, 2 of their junior security staff at the secondary access points, and a contact of his, a former MP named Torres, who now ran private security and whom he'd called in as a day contractor, at the service corridor entrance on the east side. Ethan himself was positioned on the main floor, moving. The event started at 9. Board members arrived in clusters, then shareholders, then staff. 230 people filling the Caldwell Ballroom in the organized, name-badged, agenda-holding way of corporate events. Olivia was on the stage podium by 9:15, running the opening remarks with the kind of focused authority that, Ethan had noticed, she was better at under pressure than under routine. He'd spotted Voss at 9:04. The man was not what he'd expected, which was itself informative. Ethan had expected someone who looked like power, the smooth executive presentation of a person accustomed to getting what they wanted. Conrad Voss was of medium height, slightly heavy, with thinning hair and a plain charcoal suit and the unremarkable face of a man who had spent considerable effort making himself easy to overlook. He came in through the main entrance with 2 other men, both large, both moving with the relaxed readiness of people who had done this kind of work before, and collected a name badge from the registration table and walked into the ballroom. The name badge read, Halverson Group, Observer. He was here as a credentialed attendee, completely legal, completely expected. Halverson was a registered shareholder and entitled to observe the meeting. That was the elegant part of the plan from Voss's perspective. He didn't need to crash anything. He'd arranged it so he had a right to be in the room. Ethan texted Reyes. Voss is in the building. Main ballroom, section C, arrived 9:04. Her reply came in 90 seconds. We're outside, waiting on your signal or ours. Don't move on Hale until coordinated. He pocketed the phone and kept moving. At 9:40, Hale was in the ballroom, seated 2 rows back from the main shareholder section, and he was on his phone. Not taking notes, not watching the presentation. On his phone, with the particular stillness of a man waiting for a confirmation that isn't arriving. Ethan watched him check the screen 3 times in 4 minutes. The data package had been transmitted 6 days ago. From Hale's perspective, it had arrived. Voss had it. The vote was going to go the way it was planned to go, except the vote wasn't going to go that way at all, and whatever signal Hale was waiting for from Voss, some private confirmation that the pieces were in position, it wasn't coming, because Voss didn't know yet that his operation had been read and documented and handed to federal agents who were currently sitting in 3 vehicles on the street outside the Caldwell Center. Ethan was watching Hale when the man who was not a floral delivery driver came through the east service corridor. He knew it because Torres radioed it, a single word, contact, and Ethan was already moving toward the east corridor before Torres finished the transmission. The man was alone, which was either a mistake or a deliberate choice. He was carrying a hard-sided case that was the wrong shape for anything that belonged at a corporate shareholder meeting, and he was moving with the purposeful, route-committed walk of someone who has been through the building layout in advance and is following a memorized path. He'd gotten through the service entrance with a cloned vendor credential, the same technique, Ethan noted distantly, that had been used for the data center incursion months ago. Voss used what worked. Torres had fallen back and was paralleling the man on the opposite side of the corridor through a maintenance passage. Ethan came in from the front. Wrong building, Ethan said. The man stopped. He was good. The case went down and the right hand was moving before he'd consciously decided to move it, a fast-trained response. But he'd been walking fast in a narrow corridor with a case in one hand, and the geometry was wrong, and Ethan had been waiting in a stationary position with both hands free. What followed was brief and unlovely. Ethan had stopped apologizing to himself years ago for how this kind of thing looked. It looked ugly and awkward, and nothing like the choreography people imagined, because real physical confrontations were not choreographed. They were just two bodies in a small space making fast decisions, and the person who won was usually the one who'd already made the important decisions before the confrontation started. Torres came through the maintenance door and had zip cuffs on the man before the echo of the scuffle had finished bouncing off the corridor walls. Ethan picked up the case. He opened it. A signal jamming unit, the kind that disrupts cellular and Wi-Fi in a localized area. Sophisticated enough to have cost real money. The kind of device that, deployed in the Caldwell Center's ballroom at the right moment, would have prevented anyone inside from calling for help, sending communications out, or coordinating any response while Voss's people did whatever they'd come to do. He looked at it for a moment. Then he texted Reyes a single word. Now. He heard it from inside the building, the controlled, efficient sound of federal agents entering through multiple points simultaneously, the kind of entry that is designed to leave no time for improvisation. He was already walking back toward the main ballroom. He came through the ballroom doors at the same moment that two agents in plain clothes came through the opposite doors. The room had not yet registered what was happening. The presentation was still running on the screen at the front, Olivia mid-sentence at the podium, 229 people watching her. Then the two agents in plain clothes crossed the center of the room at a deliberate, purposeful pace, and the room understood that something was happening even before it understood what. And the ambient noise of the ballroom dropped to something close to silence. They stopped at Hale's row. "Richard Hale," Reyes said, appearing from the corridor door, badge out. "Please come with us." Hale looked up from his phone. Whatever color had been in his face left it. He looked at the badge, then at the room, then at the badge again, and there was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where he was going to calculate whether there was a version of this where he didn't get up and went badly for everyone around him. Ethan was standing 6 feet from him. Their eyes met. Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The calculus was simple, and Hale was smart enough to read it, which was why Voss had chosen him in the first place. Hale put his phone in his pocket and stood up. Reyes had Voss in the corridor by the time Ethan reached the atrium. 2 more agents flanking, Voss's security detail already being moved separately. Voss was standing very still, and his face was doing the thing that well-constructed people's faces do when they encounter something they didn't plan for. Not panic, not rage, but a rapid internal reorganization, the search for the version of this that still has an exit. He looked at Ethan, took him in with an assessing, unhurried look. "You're the security director," Voss said. His voice was even. "Not what I was expecting." "I've heard that," Ethan said. "I want my attorney." "That's not my department," Ethan said. "Agent Reyes handles that part." Voss looked at him for another moment. Then something in his expression settled into something that wasn't quite acceptance, but was the beginning of it. The look of a patient man recognizing that someone else had been more patient. "How long?" Voss asked. "Just that." "Long enough," Ethan said. Reyes put a hand on Voss's arm and moved him toward the door. In the ballroom, the 200 and some odd people were doing what people do in the immediate aftermath of something that didn't fully arrive, talking to each other in low, uncertain voices, some moving toward the doors and being gently redirected by the junior security staff, some sitting in place with the slightly glazed expression of a person whose morning had not gone the direction the agenda promised. Olivia was still at the podium. She hadn't moved when the agents crossed the floor. She'd watched it happen. Hale standing, Hale being walked out, the room rearranging itself around the fact of what had just occurred. And she'd stood at the podium, with both hands on the edge of it, and her face doing the work she'd asked it to do for 3 weeks. When Hale was gone and Reyes was in the corridor with Voss, and the room was just her 200 and some odd shareholders and board members looking up at her with a mixture of confusion and something close to apprehension, she straightened up. She took a breath. "I apologize for the interruption," she said into the microphone, and her voice was completely steady. "What you just witnessed is the conclusion of an ongoing investigation into an attempt to compromise this company's security and governance. Law enforcement has been involved for over a week, and I can tell you that Carter Meridian Group is fully cooperating, fully prepared, and fully intact. She paused. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. Refreshments are available in the atrium. When we come back, we're going to continue the agenda and do the work we all came here to do. The room held for a moment. Then someone near the back started to clap. A single person, slow at first, uncertain. And then the room followed, not thunderously, but with the genuine, slightly bewildered relief of 200 people who had just been told that the adult in the room had been handling it the whole time. Ethan watched from the side corridor. Olivia stepped back from the podium and walked down the stage steps to the floor, and she moved through the crowd toward the corridor door. And when she came through it and found him standing there, she stopped and looked at him for a moment without saying anything. And he thought she might be about to say something formal, something measured, the kind of thing you say when you are a CEO and the person in front of you is your security director, and there are 200 people 30 feet away. Instead, she said, "You have his handwriting on your jacket." He looked down. There was a mark on his left sleeve, a scuff from the corridor confrontation, the man's cufflink or watch, something hard. "There was a man in the East Service corridor," he said. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at his sleeve, then up at him. "Is it done?" "Voss and Hale are in federal custody. The man from the corridor is with Torres. Reyes will want statements from both of us this afternoon." She nodded. Then something released in her face. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way pressure releases slowly from a structure that has been holding it too long. She put one hand briefly over her mouth, a gesture he'd never seen from her before, something private and unpracticed. A person allowing herself 30 seconds of something she'd been not allowing for 3 weeks. He looked at the corridor wall and gave her those 30 seconds. When she took her hand down, her face was already reorganizing itself, the CEO reassembling over the woman underneath. "I have to go back in," she said. "I know." She looked at his sleeve again. "Get that cleaned." "I will." She went back through the ballroom door. He heard the room's sound shift when she appeared. A settling, a gathering of attention. And then her voice carrying over the ambient noise with the calm, specific authority of someone who has decided that the work in front of her is the thing that matters and is going to do it. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Through the narrow window in the ballroom door, he could see the back rows, the heads turned toward the front, the ordinary organized arrangement of people doing something together. His phone buzzed. Marcus's school, a scheduled afternoon reminder about the winter concert sign-up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took a pen from his jacket pocket and wrote himself a note on the back of his hand the way he used to do in the field when he didn't have paper, winter concert, and put the pen away and went to find Agent Reyes and start giving his statement. The mark on his sleeve had already dried. He'd deal with it later. There was always something to deal with later, and most of it turned out to be manageable. The statements took 4 hours. Reyes conducted Ethan's interview in a small room on the Caldwell Center's second floor that had been set up for the winter concert season and still had tinsel garland taped along one wall, which was a strange backdrop for a federal debrief, but nobody commented on it. Kowalski took notes on a laptop and asked follow-up questions that were good questions. The kind that probe for inconsistency, not because they suspect you, but because they're building something that has to hold up in a different room later. Ethan walked them through everything in the order it had happened, from the access log anomalies on his first week to the corridor confrontation that morning. He gave them Decker's name and contact information without being asked, because the financial documentation chain was Decker's work and Reyes was going to need him. He described the mirror server system he and Garrett had built, the capture of the transmitted data package, the camera outage work order and its entry point. He was precise and he was thorough, and he did not editorialize. When he was done, Reyes leaned back in her chair and looked at her notes for a moment. "You built the evidentiary framework while maintaining your cover position inside the company," she said. "That's right." "And you coordinated external documentation through a private source without involving law enforcement until you had a complete picture." "Yes." A pause. "That's either very disciplined or very risky." "It's both," he said. "I needed a complete picture before I brought it to you. Incomplete pictures get lawyers involved and cases stall." Reyes looked at him for a moment with an expression that was professionally neutral but not without acknowledgement. "What was your background before private security?" "Navy," he said. "Specifics?" The kind that don't make for good small talk. She held his gaze. Then she nodded once, a small, clean nod that closed the question without making a thing of it. We'll need you available for follow-up over the next few weeks as the case develops. Voss's attorneys are going to be expensive, and they're going to look for gaps. There aren't gaps, he said. There are always gaps. The question is whether they're big enough to matter. She stood, extended her hand. You did good work. He shook it. Do your job, and it won't matter what I did. She almost smiled. Almost. By 3 in the afternoon, the Caldwell Center had cleared out. The shareholders and board members dispersed, the event staff breaking down tables, the federal vehicles gone from the street outside. The winter concert garland in the second-floor room would be there until someone remembered to take it down. Ethan drove to Carver Elementary and sat in the pickup lane and watched the doors. Marcus came out at 3:20 with the dark green backpack and both straps intact, and he climbed into the back seat and looked at his father in the rearview mirror with the full, unguarded attention he brought to things that mattered to him. You look tired, Marcus said. Long day. Good tired or bad tired? Ethan thought about that. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Ask me tomorrow. Marcus accepted this. He looked out the window at the passing street. Can we get soup from that counter place? Yeah, Ethan said, we can do that. They got soup. Marcus talked about the winter concert. He was playing recorder in the school ensemble, a fact he had communicated with the specific 9-year-old energy of someone who is proud of a thing and also aware that recorders are not the coolest of instruments and is choosing pride over cool, which Ethan privately considered one of the better qualities a person could have at any age. The concert was in 3 weeks. There would be a permission slip. Marcus had already pre-lost the permission slip. Ethan ate his soup and listened and felt something in his chest gradually decompress, the way it did on the other side of a sustained operational period. Not relief exactly, more like the body recalibrating to a lower baseline after running hot for too long. Dad, Marcus said. Yeah. The math face is gone. Ethan looked at his son across the counter. Is it? Yeah. Marcus stirred his soup. Whatever it was, it's done. He thought about Voss in federal custody, Hale being processed, the data package sitting in Reyes's evidence system, the staged corporate takeover that had run for 22 months and ended in a ballroom with tinsel in the room next door. It's done, he said. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and went back to his soup. The days after were quiet in the particular way of things that have been resolved but haven't yet settled. The FBI case moved forward on its own momentum. Ethan got calls from Reyes every 2 or 3 days, follow-up questions, requests for documentation clarification, the ordinary administrative machinery of a federal investigation running. Voss's attorneys were, as predicted, expensive and active, but the paper trail Decker had built was solid, and the digital evidence was solid, and Patricia Vane was the kind of lawyer who worked harder when someone pushed back, which Conrad Voss's legal team had apparently not done their research on. Hale resigned formally 3 days after the Caldwell Center. The resignation letter was 2 sentences long and said nothing. Ethan read it when Olivia forwarded it to him, and he sat with it for a moment. 2 sentences to mark the end of an 18-month deception, which was either the most efficient or the most cowardly possible accounting of the thing, and probably both. At Carter Meridian, the week after was strange. The staff knew something significant had happened. You couldn't have federal agents walk 2 people out of a shareholder event in front of 200 witnesses and then expect the office to operate under normal social pretenses. There were conversations in hallways and at coffee stations and in the break room that stopped when certain people walked by. The temporary, slightly fractured atmosphere of a workplace that has discovered it was not what it thought it was and is recalibrating. Ethan walked through all of it the same way he walked through everything, present, paying attention, not making more of it than it was. Garrett stopped by the security office on Wednesday afternoon and sat in the spare chair and didn't say anything for a moment. You could have done all of that without me, Garrett said finally. No, Ethan said. I couldn't have. The mirror server was your work. You designed it. Design and execution aren't the same thing. He looked at the man. You were good throughout this. I want you to know I know that. Garrett was quiet for a moment, with the specific discomfort of someone unaccustomed to being told they did well by someone they've come to respect. "The camera on the east corridor has been fixed, by the way," Garrett said, "and I realigned the one near the stairwell. The dead zone is gone." "Good," Ethan said. "What about the access credentialing system?" "New protocol goes live Monday. Rotating authentication, dual verification for any administrative override. The IT vendor contract is being renegotiated with the new security requirements as a condition." Ethan nodded. This was the part nobody saw. The after. The unglamorous work of fixing what had been exploited so it couldn't be exploited the same way again. It was the part he'd always believed was more important than the confrontation itself, because confrontations end and the walls remain, and the walls are what people live inside. "You should be running this department," Garrett said, matter-of-factly, not angrily. "I am running this department. I mean, if you ever—" He stopped. "Never mind. If I ever leave," Ethan said. Garrett shrugged, which was as close as he got to yes. "I'm not planning on it," Ethan said. Garrett stood, straightened his jacket with the particular motion of a man who is done being in his feelings and is returning to his normal presentation. "I'll have the new credential documentation on your desk Friday. Leave it with Anita. I won't be in Friday morning." "Anything wrong?" "School thing," Ethan said. Garrett nodded. In the 6 weeks they'd worked together, he had never once commented on the school pickups or the morning drop-off scheduling or the calendar blocks that corresponded to things at Carver Elementary. Ethan appreciated that more than he'd said. Yes, the school thing on Friday morning was a parent-teacher conference that Ethan had scheduled 3 weeks ago, before the Caldwell Center, before any of it, in the careful way he maintained Marcus's world as a separate and protected calendar on which the other parts of his life were not allowed to encroach, if he could help it. Marcus's teacher was a woman in her 40s named Ms. Anand, who had the specific calibrated patience of a person who has taught 9-year-olds for a long time and has arrived at a genuine affection for the particular chaos of that age rather than merely tolerating it. She sat across from Ethan in the small conference area off the main classroom and told him that Marcus was reading 2 grades above level, that he had a tendency to help other students with their work unprompted, which was a quality to encourage carefully so it didn't tip into doing other people's work for them, and that he sometimes went very quiet in a way that was worth watching, though he'd never seemed distressed, just internal. "He's a thoughtful kid," Miss Anand said. "He asks good questions, real questions, not the kind that are just looking for approval." "He gets that from his mother," Ethan said. Miss Anand looked at him briefly. She knew the family history. Schools kept records, and teachers read them. She didn't make anything of the comment, just let it sit where he'd placed it. "He talks about you a lot," she said, "in a good way. He told the class his dad used to be in the Navy and now keeps people safe at a company. He was pretty matter-of-fact about it, but you could tell he was proud." Ethan looked at his hands for a moment. He had a small scar on the left one that he'd had since his second deployment and rarely noticed anymore. He noticed it now for no particular reason. "He's the best thing I've done," he said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. Ms. Anand smiled, not a professional smile, a real one. "That comes through," she said. "He knows it. Kids that age know more than we give them credit for." He drove home from the school with the windows down despite the December cold, because the air was sharp and clear, and he wanted to feel it. And he thought about what Ms. Anand had said, and about Marcus telling his class his dad keeps people safe. And he thought about all the things a person carries from the life they lived before the life they're living now, and how some of those things are weight, and some of them are just shape. They make you the particular shape you are, and that shape turns out to matter in ways you didn't plan. He wasn't the man he'd been at 25, deploying into environments that required a specific and narrow human capability. He wasn't the man he'd been at 33, sitting in a hospital room watching Claire disappear by degrees. He was whoever came after those men, built from their materials but not defined by them, and he was still in the process of figuring out what that person was for, what the shape was suited to, what rooms it fit in. He thought he might be getting a clearer picture. But Olivia called him on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the Caldwell Center. Marcus was in his room reading, the apartment was quiet, and Ethan was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea he'd made because the coffee had run out and he hadn't gotten to the grocery store yet, which was its own small ongoing failure of domestic management. The board met today, Olivia said. Formal session. They voted to retain the current executive structure and reject the Halverson proxy proposal. Good. It wasn't unanimous. 2 board members who'd been moving toward Voss's position abstained rather than vote yes. I think they were embarrassed. A pause. I'm not sorry they abstained. Better than the alternative. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Patricia says the federal case is strong. She talked to Reyes today. Voss is cooperating on some of the subsidiary charges in exchange for considerations on the primary count. Hale is not cooperating, which Patricia says will hurt him more than it helps. Hale's a proud man, Ethan said. He'd rather go down clean than admit how it ended. Is that how you read him? From the start. He'd watched Hale in enough meetings to understand the shape of the man, someone who had genuinely believed, at some level, that he was operating from a position of superior intelligence, and for whom the simple, unambiguous fact of having been caught would be more corrosive than anything a court could impose. Olivia was quiet again, the comfortable kind of quiet that had developed between them over the past weeks, the kind that didn't require filling. I want to restructure the security function, she said. Not just the team, the whole approach. Budget, personnel, protocols. I want it built properly this time, not retrofitted. A pause. I want you to design it. That's already in my job description. I know. I'm telling you there's no ceiling on it. You have what you need to build what you think it should be. He looked at the tea. It had gone cold while he wasn't paying attention, which was something tea did if you let a conversation take you somewhere more interesting. Okay, he said. Another pause. Then she said, in a different register, less CEO, more person. How are you? The question surprised him slightly, because she didn't ask it as a formality. She asked it the way people ask it when they actually want an answer, and there's a difference that's perceptible even over the phone. Tired, he said. The good kind, I think. Your son said that. The distinction between good tired and bad tired. He stopped. You talked to Marcus? He called me. A brief pause with something in it. From your phone, I assume he found the number. He wanted to know if I was okay after, his words, the thing at the building. He said his dad explained there had been some trouble at work. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. 9 years old. His mother's instinct for the people around her directed outward without permission. I'm sorry, he said. That was... Don't apologize. It was... She stopped, and he heard her trying to find the right word and not quite getting there. He's very direct. He asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, and he said good, because his dad worked hard on it. And then he said, you make pretty good tacos, and hung up. Ethan sat with that for a moment. I'll talk to him about using my phone, he said. Please don't, she said, quietly, meaning it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went by with its radio up, and then the street was quiet again. Olivia, he said. Yeah. He almost said something and then didn't because whatever the thing was that was sitting in the space between them had been there for weeks and it wasn't going anywhere and it didn't need to be forced into language tonight, in a phone call, with cold tea on the kitchen table. The winter concert is in 2 weeks, he said instead. Marcus is playing recorder. It's going to be painful. She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, nothing polished about it. How painful? 18 9-year-olds on recorders. Prepare accordingly. Are you inviting me? He'd known, when he brought it up, that this was what he was doing. He hadn't admitted it until just now. If you want to come, he said. Marcus would... Yeah, he'd like that. Then I'll be there, she said. Simply, without making it more than it needed to be right now. They said goodnight. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after, in the kitchen that still needed renovation, in the house that was still just the two of them, and had been for 3 years and would be different now, incrementally, the way all real things change, not with a single dramatic pivot, but with the slow, particular accumulation of small mornings and ordinary evenings and decisions that don't announce themselves as decisions until later. He got up and poured the cold tea down the sink and found he didn't need anything else tonight. The winter concert was on a Thursday in the school gymnasium, which smelled of floor wax and old sneakers and the very specific olfactory combination of 200 families packed into a space designed for half that number. Ethan arrived early and found seats in the fourth row. 3 seats, because Marcus had submitted the permission slip with the note, "Please save 3 seats, one for Dad, one for Olivia, one in case," and the in case had never been explained, and Ms. Anand had saved 3 seats without asking. Olivia arrived 7 minutes before the concert started, in a dark coat and a scarf, carrying nothing, which he'd noticed she did when she was somewhere she'd decided to actually be, rather than somewhere she was passing through. She sat down next to him and looked at the stage setup. 3 rows of plastic chairs, a music stand, a banner that read Carver Elementary Winter Concert in letters that had clearly been made by students and were, correspondingly, uneven and excellent. "This is exactly what I needed," she said, and he believed her. The concert was, as predicted, enthusiastic in ways that periodically diverged from musicality. Marcus was in the second row of the recorder ensemble, and Ethan could pick him out immediately, the one sitting completely straight with his instrument held at the exact correct angle, the manifestation of a preparation effort that Ethan now understood had been considerable and had also been kept private until this moment, because Marcus was not someone who announced preparation, he just prepared. When Marcus's section played, it was fine. It was fine. It had the rough collective beauty of a group of children doing something genuinely hard together and mostly succeeding. And the gymnasium was full of parents leaning forward with that particular expression of love and terror that live performances produce. And at one point, Marcus looked up from his instrument and found Ethan in the fourth row and then found Olivia next to him. And something crossed his face. Quick, real, a 9-year-old's version of a thing too large and various to name. And then he went back to his recorder. Ethan looked at the stage for the rest of the performance and did not trust himself to look at anything else for a while. Afterward, in the gymnasium, with the families milling and the students running in the particular released energy way of children who have been sitting still under pressure, Marcus found them near the refreshments table. He was still carrying his recorder, and he'd apparently eaten 3 cookies already based on the evidence on his face. He looked at Olivia with the direct, assessing look he used when he was deciding something. "You came," he said. "I did," she said. "You were really good." "I practiced a lot." "I could tell." Marcus looked at his father, then back at Olivia. Then he did something that Ethan had not prepared for. He stepped forward and leaned briefly against Olivia's side in the way children do when they've decided something about a person, the particular physical vocabulary of trust that kids use before they have the words for it. And Olivia put one arm around him naturally, without stiffening, without making it awkward, just received it the way you receive something you've been quietly hoping for. Ethan looked at the gymnasium wall and felt something move through him that had no clean name. Grief and gratitude folded together the way they sometimes were, inseparable, each one making the other sharper. Marcus straightened up and took a cookie from the refreshment table and said, "Can we get tacos after?" To no one in particular. "Yes," Ethan said. "Can Olivia come?" Ethan looked at her. She was looking at Marcus with an expression she hadn't arranged. The real face, the one underneath the CEO, the one that had been in the hotel lobby when she'd been afraid and then hadn't been. "I'd like that," she said, to Marcus and then briefly to Ethan. "Good," Marcus said, already moving toward his classmates with the cookie. "The place on Halstead has the good ones." They stood in the gymnasium amid the noise of 200 families and their children, and the winter concert banner hung slightly crooked above the stage, and someone's toddler was crying near the exit with the full-throated grief of a person who has overextended themselves on an evening that was too exciting and too long, and none of it was particularly beautiful in any produced sense. It was just what it was, ordinary and specific and present. Ethan was aware of Olivia standing next to him. Not close, not far. The particular distance of 2 people who haven't decided yet what the distance is going to be, but are no longer pretending there isn't a question. "You wrote something on your hand," she said. He looked down. The note he'd written at the Caldwell Center, winter concert, had faded to almost nothing but was still visible in the right light. "Reminder," he said, "so I wouldn't miss it." She looked at the faded letters. "You wrote it at the Caldwell Center. In the middle of all of that, you wrote yourself a note about the concert." Marcus had been practicing for 3 weeks. She looked at him then, not the measuring look she'd started with back in the coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, the careful cataloging of someone deciding whether to trust. This was different. This was what comes after that, when the trust has been tested enough times to know it holds. "He's lucky," she said, "to have you." "He's the easy part," Ethan said. "He always has been." He paused. "The rest of it takes more work." She understood what he meant, the rest of it being everything that wasn't his son, all the other rooms in a life, the places he'd been less certain how to be. "I know something about hard work," she said. "I know you do." They stood in that gymnasium for another moment, with the noise of the evening around them and Marcus somewhere in the crowd with his recorder and his green backpack and the careless animal certainty of a child who has eaten enough cookies and knows where his father is. And then Ethan said, "Tacos, then." "Tacos," she agreed. They went to find Marcus. "What?" "There is something that nobody tells you about the life you build after the life you'd planned. That it doesn't feel like a consolation prize, the way you might have feared it would. It doesn't feel like settling. It feels, if you've been paying any attention at all, like something that required everything you went through to arrive at. The losses don't stop being losses. The weight doesn't stop being weight. But they are also the materials. They are what you're made of. And if you've done anything honest with them, they make you useful in ways you weren't before." Ethan Brooks was not a simple man by any measure he could apply honestly. He had spent years operating in spaces that most people would not survive, and those years had left their mark in ways that did not wash off, the vigilance that didn't switch off in hotel lobbies, the sleep that never ran more than 5 hours, the reflex to position himself between a threat and a person who needed protecting, the instinct that had been trained by years of work until it ran below conscious thought. He had also spent 3 years learning, imperfectly and without a manual, how to feed a child and attend school meetings, and fix what broke in a house, and be present in a world that did not require the specific skills his best years had sharpened. That had been its own kind of training, slower and more humbling, and he was still in the middle of it. What he understood now, which he had not understood in the hotel lobby that first evening, was that none of these things were separate. The man who had walked across the lobby toward 6 positioned men was the same man who wrote Winter Concert on his hand in the middle of a federal coordination. The man who could read the geometry of a threat in a room was the same man who listened to 20 minutes of Panama Canal history from a 9-year-old at a kitchen table. These were not different versions of him for different purposes. They were just him. The whole shape of a person who had been formed by hard things and had, somehow, remained soft enough in the places that mattered. He didn't think of himself as courageous. He thought of himself as someone who had learned the difference between fear and danger, that fear was a signal and danger was a fact, and that you could feel the first without being governed by it, and that this was the only useful working definition of courage he'd ever found. He thought of Marcus when he thought about what anything was for. Every choice that mattered came back to that. To the 9-year-old with the amber eyes and the green backpack and the instinct to call a woman he'd never met to ask if she was okay, because his father had worked hard on something and he wanted to know the work meant something. That child had been shaped by his mother and by loss and by a father who was figuring it out in real time, and he was becoming somehow a good person, curious and direct and capable of warmth without being taught to perform it, which was the rarest and most durable kind. Ethan could not claim full credit for that. He was clear-eyed enough to know that much of who Marcus was had arrived already formed, or had been formed by Claire in the years she'd been here, or had simply emerged from the particular mystery of a person becoming themselves. But he had not gotten in the way of it. He had shown up, imperfectly, consistently. He had chosen his son over every other competing priority when the choice was real and not theoretical, and he had tried to be honest about the things he could not fix and steady about the things he could. Maybe that was enough. He was starting to believe it was. As for Olivia Carter, he did not know, in any precise or plannable sense, what that was going to be. He knew that she was someone who stood at a podium in front of 200 people after the most difficult morning of her professional life, and spoke clearly and did not pretend that everything was fine and did not fall apart either, and that this quality, this particular combination of honesty and endurance, was one he respected more than almost any other. He knew that she had walked into a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue and told him she'd invaded his privacy, and then told him why and asked for what she needed without dressing it up, and that this had taken a kind of courage that had nothing to do with hotel lobbies and everything to do with the harder, quieter varieties. He knew that she'd received a 9-year-old leaning against her side in a gymnasium like it was the most natural thing in the world. He did not know what came next between them. He knew that for the first time in 3 years, the question didn't feel like something he had to protect himself from. They ate tacos on Halstead Street, the three of them, at a table by the window with the December street outside going dark and the restaurant warm and a little loud the way good restaurants are. And Marcus talked about the concert and about his recorder technique and about the kid in the third row who had dropped his instrument in the middle of the second song. And Olivia listened and asked real questions and laughed in the right places, and Ethan watched the two of them across the table and felt the thing that had no clean name move through him again. He let it. The tacos were good. The soup place was better, he thought, but he didn't say so. Some opinions are not necessary to share, and a person learns, if they are paying attention, which rooms call for which kind of honesty. Marcus fell asleep in the car on the way home, which he would never have admitted to if asked, and Ethan carried him from the car to his bed for the second time that month. And this time, Marcus didn't wake at all, just settled into sleep with the full, uncomplicated trust of a child who is home. Ethan stood in the doorway of his son's room for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and made tea he would probably forget to drink, and he sat at the table in the quiet house with the contractor's estimate still on the counter and the kitchen still waiting for its renovation and the rest of the life still ahead, and he was not afraid of any of it. That was new. He decided it was worth noting.